In this video, I'm going to discuss derivation 111. So here it is. This is a theorem. It's a sentence that's derivable from no premises. So first thing we do is always show consequent, and we always want to make an assumption. So we'll say assume CD. Now if we're following the suggested strategy, then we look and say, am I trying to show a conditional? If I am, let me do a subderivation of its consequent. Let me show the consequent. Why? Well, because again, if I complete line 3, then I can box and cancel line 1, because line 3 is the consequent of line 1, and so I can cite it for a conditional derivation. So that's why we do line 3. Now we'll say assume the antecedent. And again, we want to look and say, if we're doing a conditional, if we're trying to show a conditional, then let's show its consequent. Because again, if we get line 5, then we can say 5 CD lets us box and cancel line 3, and then we'll do whatever we want to do with line 3, and in this case, it lets us box and cancel the whole thing. So we'll say assume CD, having entered the show line. Whenever we enter a show line, we want to make an assumption. And again, we look, and we're trying to show a conditional. Answer yes, let's show its consequent. And we'll again make an assumption. In this case, it's an indirect assumption because we're not trying to show a conditional. Now, line 7 is not necessary. As it turns out, you could get away without it, and we're not going to need to use line 8. But there's no harm in doing it. So now let's look and see what we can do. Well, we have a conditional on line 2, and its antecedent is on line 6. The conditional is if P, then if Q, then R, and its antecedent P is on line 6, so we'll say 2, 6 modus ponens. That gives us if Q, then R. And now we want to look and say, can we do modus ponens or modus tollens with if Q, then R? And we have Q on line 4, so we can do modus ponens with line 4 and 9. We also have not R on line 8, so we could do modus tollens with 8 and 9. But let's do the modus ponens. 4, 9 modus ponens, that gives us R, and that's a direct derivation of line 7. And so note that actually, and we could have done those things without line 7 and 8. If you look, we can get rid of line 7 and line 8, and everything is still fine, except this becomes a conditional derivation. So the point I'm making here is sometimes show consequent is unnecessary. It's extraneous, as in this case. You don't need to show R, but it doesn't hurt. Never going to get you in trouble. Could make your derivation, oopsie, let's see, longer than it has to be, and sometimes that can be a little bit confusing, but it's never going to stop you from completing the derivation. So, okay, there's our derivation, our subderivation of R. Well, now we may have forgotten why we did show R, but if we look over here, see show consequent tells us what you just showed is the consequent of a conditional you were trying to show before, so we can say 7 CD because we know that what we have on line 7 is the consequent of the conditional we're now trying to show. Note that right now this show line is highlighted because that's the show line we're working on. Oh, and now when we cancel it, now this line is the line that's we're trying to show and we see that it's highlighted. And if we look at the line we just boxed and canceled with us, which is line 5, we say that, aha, it's if P then R. And what is P then R? P then R is the consequent of the line we're currently, currently trying to show line 3, and this tells us that what we just showed is the consequent of line 3. So we'll say 5, which is where the consequent is CD. And now again, we are now trying to show this line here. And we just completed the subderivation of line 3. And why were we trying to do that? Because it's the consequent of line 1. And so we can box and cancel 3. And that's our derivation. So this is just stick with the show consequent strategy, that show the consequent, make an assumption. Am I trying to show a conditional? Show the consequent again. And in this case, if you just stick with that a little bit, the derivation is quite straightforward, but you do have to stick with it. If you don't stick with it long enough, you will not have enough material in your derivation to complete the derivation. So I hope that's helpful.